Second order of business. I was just curious about something. You appeared on one of our mutual friends, Maggie Stewart's podcast, Off of the
Hmm.
Couch podcast. She is awesome. I love her work. She's interviewed you recently. I can't remember if you and I talked about this, but you mentioned something on her show that I was very, very curious about, which was your episode with AFib and how that kind of went away when you started to transition over to the carnivore diet. So I'm curious if you could not only share that story, but maybe share with us some of the things you've learned about that, and maybe we can make some educated guesses on why that would have changed or what would have improved just by changing
Okay.
the diet.
Okay. Before I start, listeners, I'm not a doctor, and what I'm about to share is not medical advice. It's my experience and my knowledge that I learned and some opinions. So I started keto 5 years ago. About 9 years ago, I had a sinus infection. I used to get sore throats and sinus infections a few a year. And by the way, they all stopped when I went keto carnivore. I haven't had one since, not one. It's
Amazing.
just amazing. But I used to get them a lot. And in one of my sinus infections, I came home from work, from school, and I remember we had just bought this house. And I remember just that awful, horrible pressure. And I'm going to take myself to urgent care. I don't know if I need an antibiotic. I just felt awful, terrible. So I went there, and they checked my pulse, and they said, your pulse is at 180. I said, 180? Then they checked it again. I was back down to 75, then back up to 160, then down to 65. And they said, you're in atrial fibrillation. And I kind of heard about it, but I didn't know what that was. I go, what is that all about? So they took my shirt off and they put the heart monitors all over the chest, and they verified with the monitor I was in AFib. Atrial fibrillation, our heart, this is my understanding of it. You have the atrium, and what's the other one called? The bottom part of the heart. There's another part of the heart. So it pumps the heart, and the blood goes from chamber to chamber. And when you're in atrial fibrillation, the blood kind of collects in the atrium, and the heart is pumping like crazy. It's getting like the wrong signals, and it's pumping too much, and then it stops. And all that blood collects. And when blood collects and starts pumping through the body, it can tend to coagulate. It can cause a stroke. So being an AFib is very, very dangerous. It is very dangerous. You have a higher um, possibility of having problems like a stroke. So they suggested at the urgent care, you need to go to the emergency room right now. So I drove home with my sinus infection, miserable, and I mulled it over. I Googled atrial fibrillation, and I'm like, ah. So I drove myself to the emergency room,
Wow.
and they hooked me up, and they confirmed I was in AFib. They gave me medicine to knock me back down into sinus rhythm. I don't know what that was. It was a little shot in my stomach. And then they wanted to keep me overnight to observe me. So they checked me into a hospital room. And I didn't come back into AFib again. And then they, referred me to a cardiologist. And that's when I started going to see a cardiologist. The cardiologist, they hooked me up and confirmed I was in AFib because I went back into it. And they prescribed flecainide and metoprolol. One makes my heart not beat so fast, and one keeps it stable. I forget how it went. And the paragraph of side effects, Casey, scared the living crap out of me.
Wow.
I thought, well, I better take this and we'll see how it goes. And I didn't get most of the side effects, but I got some of them, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. But I never went into AFib when I was taking that medicine. So it worked. I would go back to the cardiologist every 6 months. Um, and we just stayed on it. He wanted me to have this operation called an ablation, where they go in through your groin, they come up through the artery in your heart, and they poke through the top part of the atrium, and they go in and they actually scar a section inside the heart that's causing the heart to misfire. And I said, and I looked that up. I Googled that because I'm a big consumer of knowledge. I don't want to just take somebody's advice. I want to find out on my own. I want to do my own research. I Googled ablation. I went on to AFib sites on Facebook and talked to people that have it and had the operation. Everybody I talked to said, don't do it.
Wow.
that like 90% of the people, they have to have another ablation and another ablation and another ablation. And I went back to the cardiologist and I said, I'd rather stay on the medicine for now. I don't want to do this kind of drastic surgery. It kind of scared me. So I stayed on it, and I was on it for a while, right? And then I started keto carnivore. And I learned that the metoprolol, which is a beta blocker, it's like a high blood pressure medicine, one of the medicines for AFib, raises your blood glucose. Anybody who's on a blood pressure medicine, your blood glucose is going higher. I had a blood ketone meter from Keto Mojo. I was testing it, and my blood glucose was always over 100,
Mm.
even fasted. And you're supposed to be 100 or less. Like right now, my fasted blood glucose is around 75 or 80, not eating anything. So I thought, well, I'm doing keto. I don't want to work against myself and take this drug. And what am I going to do? So I contacted my cardiologist, and he, of course, didn't want to hear about it, didn't believe in keto, told me I should stay on the medicine and I should get the operation. So I just like, I'm not going to talk to this guy. So I, of course, did a lot more research, and I decided, and I don't recommend this for everybody because I'm not a doctor, don't take this as advice, but this is what I chose to do for self. And that was to wean off of the two drugs. And very, very, very slowly, over 2 months, I cut the pills into ever smaller portions. And then I started taking them less frequently in the day until I was off of them completely. And I did this myself. And I thought if anything went wrong, I'll go back on them. I'll go to the doctor. And I did. And I did not go into AFib. And then I was off of the atrial fibrillation medicine for a while. No AFib. I'm not going into AFib. Is it this way of eating? Is it the diet? And now what I have is 99% of the time I am in sinus, and I'm in sinus rhythm. Okay, that means that I actually have a app on my phone. I can tap it, an app on my watch. I can tap it and hold my finger here, and it counts down from 30 to 0. I won't do it now, but it'll tell me what my heartbeat is and if I'm in sinus rhythm. Apple Watch, really kind of cool. It does that. And I used that a lot at the beginning. And I was in sinus rhythm 99% of the time, but 1% of the time I would go into AFib. I'm like, shit, what's going on here? And it can happen because apparently my heart still has the condition, but I believe that eating properly over 5 years now possibly has healed whatever was causing my AFib in the chamber of my heart. I was talking to Dr. Sean Baker on his interview, and I brought this up. We talked with him a little bit, and that's from his perspective of being a doctor. He thought that maybe, he was inferring that's what happens because he's seen a lot of people with different ailments healing. And so I don't go into AFib anymore. I think the last time I popped into it was a few months ago, and it was for like 5 minutes, and it went back to normal.
Mm.
Pretty weird. So trying to think of what else I can share for anybody who gets information. Everybody's different. My brother-in-law was just recently diagnosed with AFib. Of course, I'm filling his brain with what to do, but he's not going to listen to me. He's listening to his cardiologist. Everybody has a different experience with, and nobody knows what causes it. That's the thing. I do know that obese people tend to go have a problem with AFib more than lean, healthy people. So when I lost the 35 pounds and started eating properly, maybe that's another reason my AFib got better. But that's what I have. I hope somebody can hear that story and maybe learn something about themselves. I don't know, but
Yeah.
that's me.